Thank you, Chancellor Eisen. Good evening, everyone. And I want to begin tonight by giving thanks not only for all of us who are here, but particular thanks to my co-director, Catherine Reckless. We have worked very hard together for over a year now. And not just Catherine and I, but as we call it, the Our Better Angels Committee. And the angels include Maggie Richter, Josie Gray, Catherine Clark, and I'm sure almost all of you have already had an opportunity to meet Jake Goodman, our program director. Our program tonight encompasses Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions on the theme of tragedy. Next Monday night, we will consider mourning through the lens of those religious traditions. And on June 13th, 2 weeks from tonight, we turn to healing. Tonight and each Monday hereafter, we will end our conversation with a musical offering. And I'm inordinately grateful to the musicians who have volunteered to come and play and enliven our conversation with their beautiful music. And I will later introduce tonight's musicians, but I especially want to recognize, sitting modestly in the back, the pianist Simona Dinnerstein. Simona, stand up for a second. I have been a fan of her music and her piano playing for a long time, and when I had the opportunity to hear her at a charity event for senior citizens, I made the 30-second pitch. Would she be interested in doing this kind of program? And Simona basically said, I'm in. I'm a New Yorker, and this is what we need to do. And she has curated the music for us and helped us get the Chiara String Quartet, and I'm just endlessly grateful and delighted you're here tonight as well, and also looking forward to hearing you play next week. While we are having these public conversations on Monday nights, 30 clergy, chaplains, and community leaders from New York, the New York area's Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities will be meeting each week to study one another's traditions, to build a network of like-minded interreligious leaders, and to share what they have learned in their home communities. We welcome them here tonight. I'm just going to ask, if you're going to be in the master class, just stand up for a second so everyone can see the array of clergy that is here tonight and community leaders, and we're grateful for your participation. It is, of course, our hope that our programs will awaken, as President Lincoln said it, the better angels of our nature, so that we may move forward as one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our format this evening allows me to begin by presenting some Jewish views on tragedy. And when I have concluded my 12 to 13 minutes to lay out Jewish views, we will turn to my colleague, the Reverend Serene Jones, President of the Faculty and Roosevelt Professor of Systematic Theology at Union Theological Seminary, to share her thoughts on Christian views on tragedy. Dr. Jones' most recent book is called Trauma and Grace: Theology in a Ruptured World. Once my friend Serene has had her 13 minutes, we turn to Professor Ingrid Mattson to present Muslim views on tragedy. Dr. Mattson is immediate past president of the Islamic Society of North America, the largest umbrella group of Muslims in this country. She serves as professor of Islam and director of the McDonald Center for the Study of Islam and Christian-Muslim Relations at Hartford Seminary. And she spent many years as a director of chaplaincy programs at Hartford, which gives her as well unique qualifications to speak to our issues. On Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, I sent my son Alex off early for his first day of high school. Then I left the house to vote in the New York primary election. I grew up in Cook County, Illinois, where the motto always was, vote early and vote often. Little did I know that for the first time in my life here in New York on that fateful day, I would vote twice in the New York primary election because the events of September 11th required them to hold the election yet again at a later date. Like almost everyone in this room, I remember clearly how a colleague crossed the hall and, perplexed, shared with me the odd news that a plane seemed to have crashed into the World Trade Center. Like everyone who heard the news early on, I assumed it was an accident. Now, like that morning almost 10 years ago, contemplating the tragedy of September 11th remains for me physically palpable, not just a knife in the heart of my city, but a knife in my own heart. Metaphor, to be sure, but a metaphor that leaves my pulse racing still, my blood pressure higher, and fills me, frankly, to this day with panic and dread. Recently, I was unexpectedly confronted with that film clip we've all seen way too often, a sight that some of us who live in this neighborhood had the misfortune to witness live: the plane, the flames, the smoke, the falling towers. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of cloud and shadows, spread like soot over the hills, their vanguard a consuming fire, in their wake a devouring flame. So the prophet Joel. The words of Joel recall to mind words that Isaiah spoke some 2,700 years ago. Your heart will contemplate terror. Who can account? Who can weigh? Who can count the towers? This month of May 2011 has forced us to contemplate the terror, to account and weigh. We understand the urge now, much as we did understand the urge 10 years ago, to strike out at those who hurt us, to seek vengeance against our enemies, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This desire for vengeance is a very old biblical response to tragedy and terror. Again, the prophet Joel: proclaim among the nations, prepare for war, arouse the troops, have the warriors muster. Beat your plowshares into swords, your pruning hooks into spears. The weakling shall say, I am a warrior. Now, we New Yorkers know Isaiah's words about plowshares and pruning hooks inscribed on the wall of the UN. So Joel's diatribe of revenge reversing their role is all the more startling, and he's not alone. The normally pacific, ironic psalmist sings this song in the wake of terror. Pour out your wrath upon those who do not know you, and upon the governments that do not call upon your name, for they have devoured Jacob and laid waste his dwellings. Pour out your rage upon them, let your fury overwhelm them. And one final passage to complete the litany of biblical quotation, which has been found since the Middle Ages in the traditional Passover Haggadah. This from Lamentations: pursue them with wrath, destroy them from under God's heaven. Jewish tradition recognizes and accepts the human desire for vengeance. Tragedy is real, an integral part of Jewish history. It is, in fact, all too easy for Jews to indulge in a view of our history that sets us as perpetual victims, always the subaltern to some colonizing imperialist force. In the face of tragedy, we tend to circle the wagons, lament our weakness, fantasize revenge, and we still continue to do so, regardless of our actual strength or status. For Jews, The quintessential paradigm of tragedy remains the Roman destruction of our Holy Temple in the year 70, almost 2,000 years ago. This archetype is compounded by the fact that 650 years before that destruction, the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in 586 BCE. The Hebrew Bible is full of lament about that tragedy, and post-biblical rabbinic texts happily quote those scriptures as though they were talking about the destruction of the second temple in 70. Imagine with me how a religious center, a wonder of the ancient world, was put to flame by Rome. Imagine the buildings collapsing, the flames consuming, and the young priests, flower of the priesthood, as they are vividly described in the Talmud, the young priests leaping to their deaths from the roof of the temple. The Talmud imagines a cruel and terrible death for the Roman general Titus, who perpetrated that act of terror against the temple 2,000 years ago. After his destruction, God shot a gnat into his brain, like a bullet, or like some malignant tumor, left to grow there as Titus suffered. The story is recounted in your programs from the Talmud. But I note that in rabbinic literature of long ago, the retribution against our enemies was fantasized. It never actually happened. But the hatred was real. And it was and it remains corrosive. Tragedy engenders hate. This is true. Yet if we stew in the toxic poisons that terror produces, we compound the tragedy and wear away our very souls. One Talmudic reflection on the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago asked, how is it that those pious ancestors suffered such a loss? And the response of the Talmudic dialectic is surprisingly self-reflective. It constitutes a form of soul-searching, difficult, I think, for us to achieve. Perhaps the Talmud accomplishes this because it reflects on the terror of the temple's destruction 400 years after the event. Time and hindsight allow a perspective otherwise hard-won. The Talmud never suggests that Rome was not the perpetrator, or that the soldiers of that evil empire bear no guilt for the destruction wrought. Yet the Talmud's reply about the origins of the tragedy also recognizes the danger of excessive piety and self-righteousness. The Talmudic narrative suggests that when we think we're better than everyone else, when we imagine that we and only we are chosen, exceptional, then we run the terrible risk of fear-mongering and xenophobia. We foment baseless hatred, not just against our enemies, those who genuinely and indisputably harmed us, but hatred of everyone who is not exactly like us. The Talmud even paints an ugly picture of internecine fighting, Jew against Jew. A terrible tragedy happened here 10 years ago. We have not moved past it. It hurts us still. We still fight those terrorists, evil men who sought to destroy us. Yet in other, less murderous ways, we fight one another as well. Red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican, religion versus religion. This fighting also threatens to destroy the very fabric of our body politic. One final Talmudic vignette as it were, imagines God contemplating the wreckage of the temple. It poignantly concludes, God wept for the destruction. We, like God, must learn to mourn our tragedy, that the day may come when we might also learn to heal our wounds. Serene?